Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, sitting down to talk about BioWare. Now, just last week, we got ourselves a little Dragon Age well, actually, a bit of a leak for Dragon Age Dreadwolf, and it was during said leak that we saw a little bit of gameplay, an insider report, and then we were left to our devices to think on the subject and what would become of the next Dragon Age game. Well, since then, my thoughts have really developed a bit, talking about BioWare as a whole. And that's what I want to bring to the table here today, because I want to get into a bit of what I view as their more dire situation. And it does get into the economics of the world, and the reality is that EA is turning things around quite a bit, and what that may mean for BioWare. It's obvious for many of us that we've wanted them to hit a home run for many games now, and outside of Mass Effect Legendary Edition, we haven't really gotten that. But now I think things have only become more dire for them. What do I mean by that? I'm going to dig deep into this subject. So ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here, you're into BioWare, you're in the right place, consider subscribing. Let's get started at the top. I do think the length of development plays a factor in this discussion. You have to consider that Dragon Age Dreadwolf has reportedly been in development for 8 years. If you look at Dragon Age Inquisition and the reports saying that development had started a bit after Trespasser, then yes, that would bring us to nearing 8 years. Now, Anthem, on the other case, it was confirmed in many reports, was in development for upwards of 8 years. Now, while game development is starting to take longer and longer, make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, 8 years is not normal. That is not the norm. We typically heard 3 to 4 years, and now it's really pushed into 4 to 5 being optimistic, typically 5. That's just the nature of these big budget games. So it makes sense that Dragon Age Dreadwolf would have taken a little bit of extra time. But at this point, it's a little bit worrisome. But I'm going to get into why this is major for BioWare and how this game could truly be do or die. EA has naturally been blamed for the death of many a studio. Pandemic, one of my favorites, Visceral, another favorite of mine, just to name a few top tier examples. And I believe that since then, EA has kept BioWare around strictly for optics. What I mean by that is the perception of the company would have only become worse if they shuttered the single player darling, if you will, within their company. You can take away Visceral, you can take away even Pandemic, but you can't take away BioWare. There is a special relationship between gamers and BioWare, and EA knows without BioWare, they would look like the mobile game mongering, sports game monopolizing, ultimate team pack cracking company that they truly are. Now, they have things like EA Originals, which operated in the red for many years, I think, again, to improve their public image, because make no mistake, EA was voted multiple years to be the worst company on the planet. So for those who say it's ridiculous, I say it makes a lot of sense that EA would really keep a company around just to improve how they look. Now, let's say all this is true, my speculation about optics, that EA wants to keep BioWare around for the good looks. What are we to say about their recent turnaround in the single player space? It's funny. Right before Jedi Fallen Order had dropped, EA was pretty much sending out single-player games to the pasture saying, yeah, they don't make as much money. Jedi Fallen Order was a true game-changer, turning point for the company, for Star Wars games in general. But it really showed EA, wow, we can make a lot of money off these single-player games, huh? It's not just monetization and multiplayer games and live service. No, it can happen in the single-player space if we manage things properly. Now, was it just a flash in the pan? Well, no. We've seen Respawn go on to make the likes of Apex Legends, which is fantastic, and it's sort of become the duality that EA always wanted BioWare to be, where you saw BioWare trying to do Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem, and both flopping. You have Respawn, who has delivered not only Apex Legends, but Jedi Fallen Order, both bona fide contenders for Game of the Year in their respective categories at the time of their release, and doing so in stride. Meanwhile, you also have EA Motive now being put on the map with the fantastic Dead Space remake, and also the safe but respectable Star Wars Squadrons. It's no longer just BioWare who is producing quality single-player games that people want to pay for over at EA's publishing arm. When you take an even deeper look, just very recently, Wild Hearts dropped, a very interesting, unpredictable partnership through the EA Originals brand, where Koei Tecmo and EA got together to make a Monster Hunter style game, free of microtransactions, free of monetization. That's insane to think about, but it's really showing that EA is buying on to single player. Now, you could argue, in contrast to all of this, that EA is actually going to try to support BioWare and say, well, that's just one more strong single-player studio. That's their DNA, and that can help us. And that is possible. But when BioWare hasn't delivered a strong performing game in almost 10 years, you have to start to think a little bit about what that may mean if Dreadwolf were to fail. Anthem was supposed to be the cash cow, right? Think of it like Apex Legends, the game that supported futureware BioWare RPGs. It, in fact, cratered the very team that it was set to support. Andromeda was so poorly received that it resulted in BioWare putting their most successful series ever on ice for some time. Remember that moment? Andromeda came out, the glitches were aplenty, the My Face is Tired was everywhere, it was non-stop. But then, it all really came crashing down, in my opinion, when there was no post-launch support, no additional story content, and then they said they put this series on ice. And really, when you look at when the next Mass Effect entry will arrive many years down the line, that still holds true. While the Legendary Edition is a new entry in the franchise, technically, I do think it's important to recognize that this series is not seeing a true bona fide new entry for quite some time since Andromeda. That is serious damage dealt. So out of your last 3 games, when your last best game was a remaster of your old games, I think that may start to turn some heads a bit of, okay, you can remaster and kind of remake things with Mass Effect 1, but you really haven't made from start to finish something good. And even if they did, I want to bring people back to BioShock Infinite. Remember when BioShock Infinite came out? It was one of the Game of the Year contenders. It sold millions of copies, and all of us thought Irrational Games' future was secure. But because of the extremely long period of development time, no level of success could secure that studio's future. And it scaled down considerably to now Ghost Story Games, with Ken Levine and a handful of employees at the forefront of now what we know as Judas, which has been also in development for a very long time. So if you take a real strong look at BioWare, I find them on the same trajectory as Irrational Games, where even if you were to play Anthem and go, this was good, underrated, or Andromeda, I'd say fairly, you'd go, I actually kind of liked it. It doesn't matter at a certain point when they continue to mismanage projects. And it's why I do think, in some sense, the Legendary Edition came to be. It was a quick, safe project that would bump the profits a bit and say, hey, we can produce some level of money. Of course, as a fan, I'm not going to complain. I love Mass Effect, and now having all 3 games modernized in their best shape on one disc, fantastic. But we really need to start considering where BioWare is heading, and the reason we need to think about that is if Dreadwolf were to fail. That is something that I don't want to have happen. I'm pulling for BioWare probably more than anyone on the internet, and I gotta say that I worry about what happens if this game delivers and it's nothing short of absolutely stellar, and even if it is stellar, that it has to sell the millions and millions and millions and millions of copies it needs to justify the long development cycle. BioWare's biggest problem, I don't think, is putting out quality. For all of Andromeda's technical issues, I found that game very fun to play. For all of its writing issues, I really liked the exploration evolving what Mass Effect 1 did. There was a bit of a black sheep nature to it, but it certainly wasn't bad. The problem is, though, that BioWare was in development with that title as well for such a long period of time. And eventually, you can't be EA justifying pouring endless cash into a company that has remade a lot of their recent games in the last number of months. Anthem was put together in just around 18 months. Same thing with Andromeda. It was one game and then it was turned into something completely different. If you look at it in that scope, it's actually kind of impressive how quickly they put everything together and that it actually turned out to be a playable video game. But then that starts to dry up a bit when it happens a third time now with Dreadwolf, where it was reported to be a live service game and they said, nope, none of that. We're stripping out these features. We're just going single player. I like that. And if BioWare has a future, that's the future I want from them, doing traditional single player games. But when you look at the gameplay leak, which I can't show, and you look at what's been reported, this God of War style combat, it's clear that Dragon Age is having an identity issue where it's changed its combat not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 different times. And in the case of Inquisition, you know, you can put an asterisk next to the 4 because it does have elements of the previous games. But when you look at Dreadwolf's leak, I don't want to judge it too harshly too soon, but it definitely serves as a gigantic departure from what we've typically seen from Dragon Age combat, especially if you go back to the first entry. So I can't help but look at all of this and wonder if this is not just innovation, but desperation, really, to stick out, to grab the modern consumer who loves the AAA action game and not be true to the BioWare roots, which is hardcore role-playing and just having that appeal to a mass market because there's a charm to the writing. So I worry greatly for them because I believe in today's economy, with inflation ongoing, we're seeing big tech chop down jobs everywhere. Eventually, EA is going to have to look at where they can cut their losses. And if BioWare in today's economy has another gigantic flop on their hands, which I'm really praying they don't, but let's say in a sad world, they do. You now have to look at Andromeda, Anthem, Legendary Edition, which did well, and then Dreadwolf, and really weigh things out. And I'm not advocating for the termination of companies or jobs, but at a certain point, it's the same thing I said with EA eventually pushing out Anthem, eventually pushing out Andromeda. You have to, after almost a decade, get something out of these things. And after all of these flops, could you really blame them if they said, well, our time with BioWare is done? When you combine that nasty situation, that nasty blend with Respawn on the rise, now doing a Star Wars game, and you look at EA Motive, now on the rise, probably doing Dead Space 2 remake, but speculation aside, we know they're doing an Iron Man game, and they've really proven themselves as a competent developer. And EA Originals making interesting partnerships for single-player games or cooperative games. What is the need for BioWare optically speaking? And if they are truly keeping them around for optics, that may no longer be the need. Not that, again, I am advocating for them shutting them down. BioWare made my favorite game of all time. They will always have a place in my heart. But I'm having this conversation, again, not for advocacy of loss of jobs, but to bring to the forefront a conversation that needs to start happening, which is this could be do or die for BioWare. I think when you look at the list of facts and the circumstances, it very well could be that case. I don't want to be right about it, but I think this could be a conversation we have if Dragon Age Dreadwolf doesn't absolutely over-deliver. So that's why in last week's video, I worried a bit about the news. I worried a bit about the current trajectory of the game, of the studio. We'll see in due time, but I just wanted to share these thoughts with all of you here today. So please do fire away. How do you feel about where BioWare is currently heading as a team? Do you have some of the same worries I do, and do you think EA could be putting them on the chopping block at some point in time? Let me know down below. Other than that, take great care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.